hundreds, if not thousands, of climate scientists buy into this 1.5 degrees. And yet the economics profession decides that 3 degrees is the right target because, quote unquote, anything lower will cost too much. As Peter Brown, one of my teachers, said, there's a difference between a cost that you can fix with money and a wrong that you can never fix. We haven't really processed the difference between things that are complicated and things that are complex. A machine is complicated, a farm is complex, and we can't manage complexity the way we manage complicated. The idea is to think of the economy as a healthy living organism, which means we need to understand the first principles of healthy living organisms and then apply them to the economy.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast, an Anthem Award-winning show recognized as one of the best sustainability, environment, and climate podcasts, and named one of the best climate podcasts by Earth.org. I'm Linley Dixon, co-director of the Real Organic Project. We're a grassroots, farmer-led movement with an add-on organic label that distinguishes crops grown in healthy soils and animals raised on pasture, without synthetic fertilizers or toxic chemicals. You can look for our label in stores, find a farm near you on our website, and tune in every Tuesday for a new episode on your favorite audio podcast platform or video on YouTube. Before we get into this week's conversation, choose an episode that you've loved and text it to a friend that you think would enjoy it too. You can send them an email. A personal recommendation helps our show reach more people who care about real organic farming and the food system. All right, let's get into today's episode. Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Real Organic Podcast, where we interview policymakers, journalists, farmers, professors, activists, chefs, and more, all working to reinvigorate the organic movement and bring integrity back to our label. You just heard from John Fullerton, the founder of the Capital Institute and what he calls regenerative economics. John recently sat down with Dave in person to explain how, after working on Wall Street, a chance encounter with the book Limits to Growth led him to question our entire economic system and whether it fits into the biosphere. John believes the economy is not a machine operating separately from nature, but a living system that must work within the limits of the planet. He's able to connect finance, farming, ecology, and our future possibilities in a thoughtful and inspired way. So let's listen in.
You know, I've had big conversations. You know Zephyr Teachout?
Yeah, well, I don't know her. I know who she is.
She's wonderful.
Yeah.
And she's come to our conference a bunch.
Oh, neat.
And I've interviewed her a bunch. She come up to my house. She grew up close to me.
Yeah, that's right. She's from Vermont.
Yeah, she's from Vermont.
When she was running, someone connected us, and we tried, and then we never hooked up. So.
Oh, she's a lovely person, but also an important thinker.
Yeah.
And her book, well, she has 3 books, but the book that I most connected with was called Break 'em Up. And it's really about anti-monopoly. And she was buddies with Lena Khan, you know, and they came up together, and Lena happened to be the one that went to the FTC and really did something, started something.
Yeah, she was great.
But I asked Zephyr about this question of Driscoll's puts out what I would call fake organic, but it genuinely, the fake organic, at least the domestic stuff, doesn't have pesticides sprayed on it.
Yeah.
The imported, I think a lot of it does, but okay. But the domestic doesn't. And is it wrong of us to object so strenuously, both to their practices and to the fact that they're a monopoly?
Yeah.
I said, am I wrong? It's an honest question. And she said, no, you're not wrong, Dave, because a monopoly will always behave in a certain way over time. It's inevitable.
Yeah,
they can't help but do what they need to do for their own benefit. It's the system.
It's gravity.
It's the system, right? And it's not about a good person or a bad person. Miles Ryder, no doubt, is a great person, but it's what you do in that system. It's what the system rewards and encourages.
Yeah.
It's what a lot of your work really highlights. So, well, here we are. So welcome to the Real Organic Podcast, and welcome to John Fullerton. And John, thank you for taking the time today. This is a conversation I've been looking forward to.
My pleasure.
And honestly, the topics are too big to talk about in one interview. There's too much here, but I make an appeal to you that a lot of civilians and a lot of farmers will listen to this interview. It will not be economists, and it won't necessarily be people getting a master's or a PhD. And but these things that you talk about are very relevant to them. They're important. So just try to bring us along. And I'm going to ask you to go back and do a little bit of remedial work here.
Okay.
I'd like you to go back, and I know you've told your story many times. It's an interesting story. And I want to start there because I think that it will ground people in you as a person. And how did this happen? Well, how did you get to this?
Sure.
So how did you get to this, John? You started as a banker out of college, right?
Yeah, and don't worry, my economists don't listen to me, so I'm used to non-economist audience for sure. Well, my story, I went to Wall Street right out of college. It was, this is a long time ago, so I was sort of a naive kid, to be honest, and I didn't go to Wall Street thinking I was going to become rich. I went there because I was interested in the global economy, and international finance was the grease, the flow of how the global economy worked, and that was what I studied in college, and so I went to learn. And I often use as an analogy, I was sort of like the kid who went to the Vietnam War thinking he was fighting for justice, and woke up realizing I was in a different war than I thought I was in. And but I had a great career. I worked at J.P. Morgan the whole time, almost 20 years. This was late 80s, 1990s. I left in 2001 after the merger with Chase, which really changed the culture of the place. And I was very lucky. I caught the derivatives wave, Tokyo, London, New York, right at the beginning, before derivatives became a dirty word, which is an interesting lesson in what happens to technologies that start out with a useful purpose and can be corrupted. Same stories playing out in social media, obviously, and we'll see what happens with AI. But I left after the merger mostly because I could. The merger means your stock options vest, and I'd been itchy to get out for a while, but didn't know what I wanted to do, and so I just left with no plans. And that summer, I took the summer off. That was my only commitment to myself. And I had gotten involved in what we now call impact investing, which is this idea of aligning investment capital with some social or environmental purpose beyond just profits. But that back in 1997, that was not a thing. And I invested in a charter school company, actually, when I was still at Morgan. So at any rate, in the fall, the first meeting I had back in New York to think about what I wanted to do next was with a charter school CEO, a different CEO. And I was thinking of setting up a nonprofit charter school because the company I invested in always ran into political headwinds because they were making money off of children, which is an interesting challenge. But they did create great schools. At any rate, the meeting happened to be at 9:30 in the morning on what turned out to be 9/11. And it was in Lower Manhattan. So at 9:10, I was in the subway, and this guy came in and said, they just flew a plane into the Trade Center. And he announced that in our subway car. And so I thought, a little Piper Cub private plane or something. And I got to the street to witness the second plane exploding. So I don't have a job, don't have a career, don't know what I want to do.
And you saw that plane hit the World Trade Center.
I saw it the moment after
The moment after, yeah.
I saw the explosion.
Yeah. I just asked that because, you've actually been witness to two kind of major things happening, the total shift of investment banking and then 9/11.
Yeah, there's another story along the way I'll come back to if you want.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was, I was far enough away to be safe, but close enough to be able to see whether the people standing in the window were men or women.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the way to think about it. And I could see the curtains flowing. So, it took me all day to get home. And now I was really perplexed. What was wrong with me that I didn't want to keep doing what I was good at? what was going on in the world, what's the future my kids were going to grow up in. And so I went into kind of my deep think period, probably clinically depressed as well. Interestingly, mostly about who am I rather than what was happening in the world, because I was 41 and I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, kind of thing. And, but that caused me to have the opportunity to read books. I just buried myself in books. I would get up from the dining room table after dinner and go to the Barnes and Noble and just collect books that would find me, no particular curriculum. And one of the books I read must have suggested or referenced this book, Limits to Growth, which was the 1972 or 3 MIT study that was very controversial at the time, but translated into a whole bunch of languages. I think it sold 10 million copies. And it essentially said in the 1970s, if we keep doing what we're doing, economic growth, the system will collapse. And it didn't predict an exact date. It wasn't even a prediction. It was a bunch of scenario analysis.
Can I interrupt for a moment?
Yeah.
I knew Dana Meadows, the lead author of that. And I never had read her book.
Really?
And I look back and I go, God, how could I
she was
have
another
known
Vermonter.
Dana? She was wonderful.
Yeah.
She was taught in the environmental studies department at Dartmouth.
Yeah.
And I think I knew her from like cutting up cheese at the co-op or something, or weighing out walnuts. And she was just a lovely person. And some years later, and she died young.
Yeah.
And
she died the same year I left Wall Street.
Did she? Yeah.
So I never knew her.
Yeah, so she was dead by the time that you read her book. Yeah.
But I dedicated my book to her.
That's right. And she was that book was important, and she was an important person in my little world too. I'm reading the book now.
Are you?
Yeah, and I've listened to a number of her.
Yeah.
I've listened to her speaking over and over. There aren't a whole lot of recordings, but the ones there are excellent.
No podcasts in those days.
No podcast, but she gave a great talk at University of Michigan.
Oh yeah.
And hour and a quarter talk about limits to growth and systems thinking.
Yeah.
So you've really studied this. Could you explain for people, maybe they will go and read one of the versions of Limits to Growth, but could you explain what blew you away and what was the basic thinking that was so powerful?
Yeah. Well, in fact, there's been 2 sequels to Limits to Growth. And I'm pretty sure the first one I read was called Limits to Growth, a 30-year update. And the update... That was
the second sequel. The first one was Beyond the Limits
Correct.
to Growth. Yeah, you read this. You read the 30-year update
book
first.
Right.
Okay.
Which was still probably, still at least 5 years old when I read it. I read it probably in 2004, soon after I had left Wall Street. But the good thing about reading that book first, so that's the one I would recommend, is that it was ex post. So it was looking back to see the scenarios, the predictions, the different models.
As they say, they're not predictions.
Yeah, they're not predictions, the different scenarios.
Of how the world might play out depending on what we do and what happens in reality.
And the baseline case, I forget it's called, it has a name, but the base case was, economic growth continues at 2 or 3% a year in the West. I can't remember what they assumed about China and India growth rates, but probably faster. And with that economic growth is an expansion of, what they call the material throughput, right? So more energy, more stuff out of the ground, more waste, more pollution. And the thing that struck me is that, of course, economic growth is the base case of our whole global economy. And our pensions are leveraged to growth. Our government budgets are leveraged to growth. The whole Social Security system is dependent on continuous growth. And businesses' profitability benefits tremendously from growth. If you sell more tomatoes next year than you did this year and your costs stay the same, you make more money. It's a pretty simple equation that growth, in terms of all of the things we focus on in economics, creates all of these positive benefits. But what we don't measure are what the economists call externalities, like the pollution that no one pays for, or most dramatically, the climate change that no one is accountable for or responsible for or limited from contributing to. And so what struck me as a financier is that the whole logic of finance, what I now call the finance algorithm, not only depends on growth, but it forces the system to keep growing by its design. And it's not a question of debt versus equity. All of it, the capital doesn't flow unless the investor or the bank can see that the capital will generate a return, a financial return. And the financial return most oftenly is at least connected to some growth in the material throughput, what they call the ecological footprint of the economy, the use of resources, the creation of pollution. And none of that mattered it mattered, but it wasn't like profound until the economy got so big that it was breaking the biosphere. And we now have measurements, the planetary boundaries measurements, which are telling us that we're breaking the ecosystem function that we're dependent upon.
Okay, let me jump in just for a second. So when Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations in 1776, the same year that we declared independence from England, he wasn't imagining running up against limits to growth, ecological limits, that we were going to run out of resources. That was not in anybody's imagination in 1776.
As far as I can tell. No.
Because the population was so low relative to the resources. And as the population grew and it started drawing the resources, and eventually it hit a point where they crossed. However, that point was not a great alarm being raised, because that's the nature of this system's thinking, is that there comes a point.
There's savings. Think of it as like a savings account.
Yeah.
You know, let's say you're making $100 a year and spending $110 a year, but you have $1,000 in the bank.
Right.
Nothing happens in year one. There's no problem. Nothing happens in year two. But eventually you're drawing down that savings, and all of a sudden you're spending more than you're earning, and there's no buffer, there's no cushion. And you know, the biosphere has massive buffers and ability to respond and whatnot. So we've been able to play this game for centuries, even though we've been, for certainly the last 50 years, clearly drawing down more than we're replenishing.
Now, Dana talked basically about Herman Daly's three metrics for what would be a sustainable system.
Yeah.
And one would be to not take a renewable resource at a quicker rate than it can renew itself.
Correct.
And one would be to not take a non-renewable resource quicker than you can replace it with a renewable resource.
Right.
And the third one was not to have pollution as a result of your activity at a higher rate than the biosphere can absorb it.
Correct.
So those are the three things, and I think those are undeniable.
You would think.
I mean, nobody would disagree. Yeah, we can just keep doing it. They might disagree that we are doing that, but they wouldn't disagree with the idea of it.
Yeah.
The logic of you can't use a non-renewable resource faster.
Well, yes, I guess I would agree and disagree. I I think the challenge with Herman's work, and he was one of my teachers. Ecological economics is the discipline that he and colleagues created, literally in, kind of tangential to Dana's writings. That all happened. Interestingly, a lot of things were happening right around that time in the early 1970s. And the trouble is that if you look outside and see the sunny day, it doesn't feel like there's a problem, because all of these systems are so vast and the changes that happen to them are so slow compared to our myopic, long term for humans is 10 years. And these changes happen, even now, the consequences of what we've done are not going to really hit us for another 25, 50 years, even though they're already baked in the system.
Okay, so I know that we're going to get there, but I'm just curious because one of the things that Dana definitely talks about, and Dennis Meadows has talked about it, and you have talked about it, is that, yes, it seems very slow. You don't see the problem until suddenly the problem is huge and obvious.
Yeah.
And I think that would be called the time of overshoot.
Yeah. Well, no. Overshoot would be when the lines cross.
When the
right?
lines cross,
Yeah.
But you still haven't seen the problem. Collapses when you see the problem.
I mean, the analogy I always use, and I didn't make this up, is like the old joke, how did your company go bankrupt? And the answer is slowly and then quickly. Yeah. How did the Berlin Wall fall? Slowly and then quickly. And this is actually the science. The science, and this is what Dana and Dennis taught at MIT, studied and taught. And this is actually like one of the key points that I would want to share with the audience is we humans, particularly Western humans, have not, obviously there are people that have learned this, but we haven't really processed the difference between things that are complicated and things that are complex. And complex systems, like a farm, but not like a machine. A machine is complicated, a farm is complex. And we can't manage complexity the way we manage complicated. Complicated has, the phones or the cameras we're using right now have a design that's been refined into an optimal design. And the manufacturing process has been fixed such that it's an optimal design. And the context isn't changing. Whereas on a farm, the context tomorrow could be very different than the context today. And the reason this is relevant, and that's when systems collapse, is that you don't adjust what your behavior is to the changing context. And that's, remarkably, I wouldn't say misunderstood, it's simply not understood. We're ignorant of these issues. And going back to the history of the economics discipline, it's actually more informative to look forward from Adam Smith roughly 100 years. You're now living in a world where Newton's science is, Newton's the guy. He's developed the physical laws, mechanical laws that explain gravity in particular. And what happened is a bunch of mathematicians and scientists decided they would turn the economics discipline that Adam Smith and others were creating really as a philosophy. It used to be called political economy, and it was understood as a philosophy. They wanted to make it a science, and they wanted to apply mathematics to it to make it a legitimate science. And so they literally borrowed Newton's equations that were designed for a mechanistic system and assumed they would apply to the economy. It's that basic, the error.
They were applying the thinking of something that was complicated, but it was actually complex.
Exactly.
And
they assumed it's a complicated machine,
That's
literally a machine. Irving Fisher literally built a model of a machine to model how the economy works. And you can increase the input of money, and you can, and you can control it. And we're still suffering from that error. That error was never fixed. There's been lots of modifications to what's called neoclassical economics, but no one ever went back to the beginning and said, wait a second, we can't build a discipline on a set of assumptions that an economic system mirrors a mechanistic system. Because an economic system is, first of all, it's human beings. We're not machines. It's a human economy. And it's embedded, as Herman Daly made us aware, it's embedded in the biosphere. It's not a separate system from the quote, natural resources that we're dependent on. These early economists, they literally ignored the second law of thermodynamics. That was Herman's genius. And in fact, his teacher, a man named Georgescu Roegen, wrote a book called the Economics and the Entropy Law, or the Entropy Law in Economics. And modern economists have not acknowledged that neoclassical economics ignores the second law of thermodynamics. And I'll talk more about some of the other fundamental problems. But what blew my mind, I've been a banker for 20 years. No one ever talked about this. Certainly no one was aware of it. There's no one on Wall Street, I say no one, very few people on Wall Street that run the big banks, that run the big hedge funds, would know that neoclassical economics ignores the second law of thermodynamics. I haven't found one that knows that.
Can you explain what that means? That it ignores or is ignorant
So
of?
the second law, this is, and I'm not qualified to explain the entropy law, but to me, this is the idea that energy goes from being available to unavailable. So use an example. You have a log. There's a lot of embedded energy in a log. If you light it on fire and burn it, it releases the heat, that's the energy, and you're left with ashes. And there's no way to turn the ashes back into a log. And this is actually kind of a depressing reality about the material world we live in, is that the world is moving from order to disorder. But something else amazing is happening, which is that life is happening. And somehow, in the face of this entropy, which is apparently, the scientists say it's probably the most, scientists are most confident that the entropy law will never be overturned of any of the laws of physics. But remarkably, something else is happening at the same time, which is that life is, evolution is happening. Life is complexifying. And progress in not just the human, project, but like the whole planetary project is continuing to evolve in a positive direction. And so there's this sort of offsetting force happening in the face of entropy, that somehow that entropy is manifesting more life, more complexity, more variety, unless we interfere with that process. And the cosmologists that I've studied with tell me this is a process that's happening not just on this planet, but in the entire universe. And this is actually the connection to this regenerative idea. The idea of regenerative agriculture is a manifestation of unseen potential manifesting if you create conditions for life to work on a farm, as opposed to destroying conditions for life using industrial methods of agriculture.
Okay, I really want to go there, but first I want to go back to the limits to growth. And you read this book, and you were developing a new vision of reality.
Well, reading Limits to Growth for me, and particularly since I read the 30-year update, so looking back, essentially the 30-year update said, yeah, we pretty much had it right.
Yeah.
And that, there's shorter, you can read an article that peer-reviewed science article that shows that their baseline scenario, obviously it wasn't perfect and the models they used were primitive compared to what we have today. But the basic idea they had was right. And there's a famous quib that anyone who believes that you can have exponential growth on a finite planet is either a madman or an economist. So that idea is true. I don't know how you could refute that idea. Plenty of people have tried. Yeah, technology will fix it. Well, da 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 da. But there is some point where there's an undeniable reality that the planet is not expanding. And so if we are using more and more stuff and turning more and more resources and energy into waste and pollution, at some point, the savings account's going to run dry and bad things are going to happen. But in the same way that, so to answer your question, because I was I mean, if I'm honest, I don't know why reading this or learning this hasn't created more of a reaction the way it did for me. I honestly don't know, because to me it was mind-numbingly obvious that this was a existential. I say in one interview, this is a put your pencil down and rethink everything. This is not it's a problem to solve. No, this is like fundamentally the entire economic system is built on a set of unsustainable assumptions, assumptions that are false, giving us an unsustainable pathway. And I couldn't predict whether that was going to happen in 10 years, 20 years, or not in my lifetime, but eventually it couldn't continue.
And all of us live in that economic system.
Right. And we happen to live in at the moment. And this was the other thing that took me years to get comfortable with. Like, what are the chances, Dave, that you and I happen to live at the moment, not when the lines cross, but that when the consequences would become real? And I'll tell another quick story, which was, again, bringing home this point. We now talk about the poly crisis, right? This idea that there's these interconnected social, ecological, economic, financial, and now political crises that are sort of spinning out of control and feedback loops on each other.
And this is important because I know this is a big deal for you. They're interconnected.
Yeah.
These are not independent crises
Correct.
that are happening and it's like, oh my God, there's another one.
Right.
You're saying that they are influencing each other, and as one crisis gets worse, it's making the other crises worse.
Yeah, and even within the ecological problems, they're interconnected. Right. So it's complex. We can't literally get our head around the consequences. So, what's causing the political divisiveness and the move to extremes? Well, there's probably 15 reasons, but some of them relate to the economic system. So the economic system has political consequences. And certainly the effect of the ecological crises flow back into the economy in ways that, hit us first in agriculture. I mean, so many of your audience know this from experience. This is not a theoretical thing. But just going back to how it affected me personally, I would go around talking to my banker friends as if I was like Paul Revere, like I had discovered this thing. And I mentioned earlier, I was really in a tough mental place, like what's wrong with me? And I thought I had found my purpose, which is I worked on Wall Street at, JP Morgan, arguably the most prestigious bank. I knew the people there. And then I'd learned this stuff, and those people needed to know what I'd learned. So my job was to go tell them, because they kind of run the world. So once they understand it, then we can solve the problem. And not only did they not care, they didn't see that it was a problem. To your point earlier, like this is seemingly self-evident truth. But what I've learned over many, many conversations and now over 2 decades is that we humans are either not good at or are even incapable of changing our identities when our identity is in conflict with a reality that we discover.
You've told a story. I really thought it was significant. You were talking to one guy, one billionaire, who had just retired from a great deal of his career, and you were explaining this to him, and you said he had his head down, and he said, "It's too much.
Yeah.
I can't take it in."
And it's, I'll be specific. So this is a wonderful guy. This was not, a billionaire in any derogatory way. I doubt he was a billionaire.
Okay.
I don't know. But his name was Bill Harrison, and he was a gentleman Southern banker who ran Chase when Chase bought Morgan. And so he was like, he was the guy that led the consolidation of the banking industry and capped off his career by, it was called a merger, but Chase bought Morgan and took over it. And I had an opportunity to know him through long-term capital, the hedge fund crisis. So we knew each other. I never, I left before I ever worked directly for him. But years later, I had I knew him well enough to say, I'd like to have lunch with you. And I was thinking, here's someone who now has time because he's retired. He's got, he can pick up the phone and call anybody in the world. All I needed to do was enlighten him into what I'd spent now a good 5 years wrestling with. And we'd go figure out what to do about it. And again, I need to emphasize, Bill is a good human being, a caring human being, not the negative stereotype we might have for a Wall Street type. And you're right, I essentially did the exponential growth on a finite planet spiel. And he put his head down a little and he said, it's too big. I can't go there. And what I interpret that to mean is that he at least intuited that if he went there, it would undermine his entire success story because it was built on something so profoundly consequential in a negative way that it would undermine his identity. And I've had that experience many, many times with people now where we don't want to face facts that force us to question our identity. And I think that's a harder problem than doing the math on carbon emissions and whatnot. And it helps explain why the, quote, powerful people are the last ones to see the problems that all of us, quote, not powerful people seem to think are obvious. And that's true, I think, whether if you're a tech billionaire now, and someone questions whether technology is going to solve this problem, you have to believe it will, because that's your whole identity. And for me, there's some terrifying belief systems and statements coming out of our tech elite who are the extreme example of, call it left brain, analytical, logical, problem-solving, complicated problem-solving abilities without the balanced right brain, imaginative, curious, holistic thinking ability to see beyond, see the complexity as opposed to the narrow, complicated.
You quoted Einstein, perhaps, in saying that without a theory, it's not possible to see some things. I don't know the exact wording, but
he again, it may be a misquote, but the idea what he said is, which again I really it landed with me. He said something to the effect that it's the theory that determines what we're able to see. And what I interpret that to mean is that, most people that are out trying to do good in the world are building models of a solution. Show me that I can build a organic farm that's profitable, that can survive in the system. And if I prove I can do it, It tells you it's possible.
That's right.
And Einstein would say, seeing is believing. Or we would say, seeing is believing. Show me an example, which is obviously true. But what Einstein is suggesting is the opposite is also true, that believing determines what we're able to see.
Yes.
So the theory, neoclassical economics, is the theory that we all subconsciously, anyone who's studied economics, that's what they've studied by and large. And anyone who even thinks about the system is thinking about a system that is the system of a machine logic.
I don't think it's limited to people who think about the system. I think everybody in the system, it's like the Matrix. Everybody just believes this story.
Yeah.
And
the thing is, the story works the way it's designed, right? You can't deny that it's true. It actually, if you grow, if your sales increase, you're going to make more money.
That's
all
right.
else equal.
If you do these things, you will have an easier life.
Yes.
For now.
Yeah. And if business in general grows profits, then stocks go higher, and my savings account, my pension gets larger. So I want those things to happen.
That's right. And so when you come in and say, well, that's not quite right, you seem a little like a crazy person.
Right.
Right? Okay. So how do you deal with that? I truly do see what you're talking about, which is that it's so hard to imagine, when people talk about capitalism, and I always go, I don't really want to talk about capitalism because it's like Mount Everest sitting on my shoulders.
Yeah.
How do we change this thing?
Right. Too big.
It's too big.
Too big.
So, but how do we change something that we know needs to be changed? That's the question.
Well, if I had a good answer for that, I'd be working on it. I think that's for me, that is the great work of this moment, is that we're waking up to this idea. And I'm by far not the only one Herman Daly talked about this 50 years ago. What's different about my work is that I think I have a pathway through this, which we'll talk about, which is a new thing. But the first thing we need to do is get clear on, the mess we're dealing with, the consequences of having built an entire global system on an idea that was fundamentally flawed. But it wasn't flawed in the short term, it was only flawed in the long term, right? It could work for a while because effectively we were drawing down the savings account. And another way to think about the savings account is the resilience of human beings. But we've drawn down the resilience of human beings because as it gets tougher to grow the system for all kinds of reasons, we put more pressure on the, quote, labor.
Yeah.
We extract more from the planet and we extract more from labor. And we extract more from management. It's not much fun being a senior manager in many of these businesses these days. They're getting their well-being is being extracted in order to keep the game going, because we're reaching I used to, when I started in derivatives, we used to joke, this is the easiest job there is. Marketing involves answering the phone. Morgan. It was easy. Whereas now, it's hard. And the pressure to keep making more money from a higher base makes it that much harder, right? Because it's exponential. So everyone's under intense pressure, which is having consequences on society. And it's obviously having consequences on the planet. So we happen to live at the moment when, the chickens are coming home to roost. It's either a really depressing story because, there's a whole movement now around degrowth. Mm-hmm. Like if growth is the problem, well, degrowth must be the answer. Well, no, that's the same mechanistic thinking. There must be a way if if you think about how life goes through cycles, living systems go through cycles. Yes, a forest may burn down, but it creates the conditions for a new forest to grow that's going to be healthier than the old forest. And so the reason that I've remained hopeful, and the reason I'm so passionate about this idea, this regenerative process, that is the process that explains how life works, is that if we can align our economy with that process, which is something that farmers understand. And by the way, this is where I got this idea, was working in agriculture. In my case, it was grasslands. And
Let's
I know
talk
I'm
about
ahead.
Alan Savory. No.
Okay.
So I know Alan and have interviewed him a number of times, and he's actually a tough guy to interview. I really like and respect him. But
yeah, I'm sure he's a tough guy to interview.
he's a tough guy to interview, and it's even worse when he starts interviewing you. It's like, no, please don't ask me what I think about that.
Yeah.
So we all laugh about it who have met Alan and gotten to know him. But I think it's a very important thing. So can you talk about how you met Alan? Really talk about what you learned from him.
Yeah.
Don't just sum it up in a sentence. I'd really like to understand that process for you.
So maybe I'd also even describe a little bit, like my encounter with Alan is an example of what has been pulling my search forward, which is a series of synchronicities that are crazy. You know, I think there's a lesson in this, because we're all convinced that we've got to figure out our problems. And there's something else going on in this universe, right? I don't want to get too out there, but you're talking to someone who was at wit's end, can't figure out what I want to do, and can't figure out why I don't know what I want to do. And then these coincidences started happening. And so my meeting with Alan is an example. And, I'm sure you're a fan of E.F. Schumacher, one of the early real thinkers about what's wrong with economics. And one of my first destinations in my search was the Schumacher Society up in Massachusetts. And so a few years later, Susan Witt, who still runs the Schumacher Center, invited me to write a chapter for a book that was going to be published to celebrate what would have been Fritz's 100th birthday. His daughter was working on this. And I don't think the book ever was finished, but I wrote this chapter. And it was called The Relevance of Schumacher for the 21st Century. And Hazel Henderson, who I had met, another one of the great formative thinkers about what's wrong with economics, sent it to Alan Savory. So I met Susan Witt. I happened to write this piece. It didn't get published, but a different person sent it to Alan Savory, who says he received it sitting in Zimbabwe in his, quote, mud hut. And he sent me an email saying, I'd like to talk to you. And believe it or not, I'd actually already heard of this guy, because I was hanging around, organic farmers and regenerative ag. And I think I had seen a talk at Stone Barns about rotational grazing. And so he was the guy. And so, I literally ran into the house. Sue, I got an email from Alan Savory. So why did he write me? Well, he saw in what I wrote, a finance guy who kind of was thinking holistically, is what he would say. And to make a long story short, he came to visit, we got to know each other, and they were at the point of wanting to essentially get some land under management so they could prove over a long period of time that this holistic grazing system would create lasting improvements on the grasslands, on the ranch lands. And so, there's so many synchronicities that happened here. But I ended up finding a partner, Larry Lunt, who together we acquired some land out in the United States, out west, and built a company to manage this land in accordance with this holistic management practice, with the idea of not just measuring our financial results, but measuring the ecological benefits on the ground over a sustained period of time, and even measuring carbon sequestration, which is very complicated, as you know, in soil. And it turns out that Larry Lund's brother had been trained by Alan Savory, which I had no idea, and his father was a rancher in Cuba. I mean, there's all these crazy things. So all of a sudden, here I am. I'm a East Coast water rat, you know, coastal creature, out on ranches in the middle of Montana with a group of cowboys, which is not my place. And I was literally standing on a ridge in Montana. It was just Alan and I, and he was pointing to the ground, showing me all the problems with, you know, there's too much space between the plants, and this plant's not healthy, and none of it was that interesting to me. And I'm looking out at this beautiful horizon, and just kind of, you know, my imagination wandering. And it occurred to me there that if this idea of holistic decision making, which is really the key, it's not really about grasslands and cattle, it's holistic decision making. If this can be used to manage the complex system we call the grasslands, and it obviously could, because we were unlocking potential that the other ranchers never saw. In other words, we were grazing using more animals to create more disturbance, to heal the land, which grew more grass, sequestered more carbon, retained more water, more biodiversity, by doing something radically different than the conventional wisdom.
And you saw it work.
And I saw it work. And I invested my own money in it, so I was at risk that it would work, which tends to focus the mind. And it's not as simple as, yeah, it worked great. You know, I mean, the weather changes. The first 2 years we were in business together, we had the worst droughts. So it's, you know, there's complexity in the story. But we certainly outperformed the other ranches in that region. In fact, there was one year where the neighboring ranches had to destock and sell off all their cattle. And we reduced our cattle down to the stocking rate that the neighbors had done in good times. So I saw that this was, the analogy I gave is, it was like we bought an apartment building that was 10 stories high, but we were able to find 5 more stories to rent out compared to what the neighbors did, just as a way to explain this to my finance friends. And that has now been proven on millions of hectares around the world as a grazing system that not only reduces the degradation, but actually restores and regenerates the health of the land. And in the process, the health of the families and the communities that are working the land. And I literally said to myself, standing on this ridge in Montana, if this works on the living system called the grasslands, then why wouldn't it work on the living system that I call the global economy? Yeah. And that was one insight that no one had asked before. And that's a different insight than Herman Daly's great work, because Herman Daly's work recognized the limitations, but it didn't invite a different way of thinking about the system as a living organism to be managed holistically, as opposed to a machine to be managed in a way that didn't destroy the machine.
Okay, can I jump in? So I've got a lot of questions here. First of all, is this connected in any way to the Gaia hypothesis?
100%.
Okay, so can you explain the Gaia hypothesis?
Yeah.
And then we'll go to the economy as a living system, huge thing.
Yeah.
So can you explain to people what the Gaia hypothesis is?
Well, probably not, but I'll try. I mean, mental block. James Lovelock.
James, yeah. Lynn Margulis.
And Lynn Margulis together developed this idea that we should see the planet as a living organism. Not in the sense of it'll have babies and create more planets, but as a complex, self-organizing, self-fueling, adaptive, responsive organism that continues to complexify, continues to go without anyone touching it or controlling it. It's the self-organizing, self-maintaining aspect of it. It's a miracle.
I'm curious.
Is that a reasonable?
That's a great.
Okay.
I'm just curious because I haven't read Lovelock's work. I've been heard about it, but is the fact that there is a lot of life on Earth part of that? In other words, could you have could Mars be a Gaia hypothesis, or is life necessary to be building the feedback that creates the atmosphere?
I don't want to speak beyond my understanding. I'm not a scientist. I'm certainly not an Earth scientist. I'm pretty sure that the scientific answer to that is that there's something unique about this planet. But I was just talking with Brian Swim, a cosmologist, and he would tell you that the entire universe is self-organizing and evolving. And one of the so I'm at my limit of it's mind blowing, right? Yeah. It's literally mind blowing, and it gets to question well, where does my faith fit into this? Because none of this you're going to be able to quote prove to yourself to the level of like you can prove an equation like 2 + 2. But I've come to the point where I find this is simply, it has, I experience awe thinking about it. Like it's fantastic. And to think that we're despoiling this process, whatever it is, however it works, for me is it's a, and I know for you, it's like you can't unsee it once you see it. And you can't not work on this challenge once you process it as it's possible that what we're doing with our economy is undermining the continuation of this healthy process to the point where it's going to trigger some cataclysmic, not the world's going to end, not everyone's going to die, but like fundamentally negative and semi-permanent consequence just seems intolerable.
Yeah, we might be destroying the garden. You started to see the economy as a living system. So could you explain to me, what did that mean? That was a huge shift, right? You didn't grow up and didn't work with people who saw the economy as a living system. What does that mean, a living system?
So there is, it's a great challenge because all of my work rests on that premise that the economy is a living system. So what is a living system? I would argue our bodies are living systems. A forest is a living system. As I've studied ecology, there's different, the discipline of ecology thinks about life in different ways. So if you're talking about systems ecology, you're probably closer to studying living system science. But also if you just study complexity science, you're effectively learning about complexity, which is a description of living systems. But not all complexity continues to live. There are complex systems that collapse. So what we're interested in are the complex systems that somehow continue to evolve. And my simple idea is, or that's the underlying logic of the assertion or the premise that the economy is a living system, is that one of the patterns that describes living systems from the microscopic to the cellular to the organ to the organism to the community to the biosphere to the universe is that there are patterns that repeat across scales. This idea of fractal patterns, right? So if you look at If you look at a human body and our cardiovascular system, we have big arteries, mid-sized veins, and lots of small capillaries. If you look at a tree, you're going to see something similar. The pattern above ground on a tree is similar to the pattern below ground. So these patterns are everywhere in the living world. And so the idea of the economy as a living system is that if human beings are living systems, and a family is a living system, and a company is a living system, and an economy and a government agency is a living system, it's not a machine, it's a system. So it's either a machine or it's a living organism. If it's made up of living organisms, fractal logic would suggest it too is a living organism. And by the way, then I started discovering that a lot of other people have been talking about companies as living organisms. I didn't invent that idea. So people have been thinking about this. But if companies are living organisms, and if government agencies are living organisms, and if nonprofits are living organisms, and if hospitals, even though they're a building, they're filled with people doing the work, if all of those things are living organisms, correctly understood, then the economy is essentially the sum of all of them, working in some complex way that is hard to get our head around. But it behaves today as a very unhealthy, if it's a living organism, it's a very unhealthy one, because it's spitting out all these problems. These, what the economists would call externalities or unintended consequences: pollution in the rivers, climate change, poverty, inequality, mental health crises.
And when they call them externalities, they're sort of relegating them, saying that's not really part of the economy. That's somewhere else, wherever that
which is an
would be.
oxymoron.
Yeah,
right. I mean,
because how can it not be?
Yeah, like that's the fundamental underlying. That's why you need to get to the root of the underlying assumption. The underlying assumption was that the what we call the biosphere, which is not even a complete description, because the mountains and the atmosphere are all part of Gaia, and the minerals underneath the ground. Those are all part of this system. Well, here's where my I don't want to misstate on the science, but it's one of my teachers, Jude Curvan, calls it the Gaia-sphere, right? It's all of these systems. The economists assumed that this was just natural resources as an input to the system, and so are people. We called it labor, and capital was there to organize natural resources and labor in such a way as to create profits in businesses and products and services for end users, and profit as a result. It's designed as a machine that generates profit as a result of the algorithm, and it does that. But it sees the Gaia-sphere as natural resources, as an input to the system, as opposed to seeing the system as embedded in the Gaia-sphere. Yeah. It's completely backwards, and you can't like fix that, right? It's like a fundamental flaw that you can't, you either go back and rethink it from the ground up, but what the discipline has done is it's called these externalities. And then it said, well, let's put a price on the externalities to bring the externalities into our machine. But as Peter Brown, one of my teachers, said, there's a difference between a cost that you can fix with money and a wrong that you can never fix. So take a baseball game. If there's a baseball game in the neighborhood and everyone leaves their litter on the streets, and so someone has to pay for the litter cleanup crew to come in and clean up the litter, that's an externality of the baseball game that can be fixed with money. You just pay the cleanup crew. But if it's dumping CO2 into the atmosphere at a level that will reach, 4 degrees warming, that's not a cost that can be fixed with money. And yet the economics discipline is trying to fix that problem by taxing pollution. But there's no tax that can fix the problem if you go past a certain level.
You've told the story of the guy who got the Nobel for economics, who said that we can't afford.
Yeah.
Could you tell
Sure.
that? Just because I think it's a perfect example of what you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, and then it'll bring out another fatal flaw of the discipline. But so in 2018, well, first I should tell you, the Nobel Prize in Economics is a fake Nobel Prize. It's an interesting story, but I don't know I don't know what Mr. Nobel's thinking was, but he clearly did not consider economics a science when he set up the Nobel Prizes for the sciences. And why he chose not to, I don't know, but he didn't. So there is no Nobel Prize in economics. But a group of neoclassical economists who essentially run the Swedish central bank decided that there needed to be a Nobel Prize in economics to be given out along with all these other prizes in Sweden. So they created a new prize, which is the Swedish Central Bank Prize in honor of Alfred Nobel. And the Nobel family complained, but there is now a Swedish Central Bank Prize, which is considered the Nobel Prize in economics. And in 2018, it was awarded, so there's a quick little bit more background. So we've talked about ecological economics, which is the big leap forward to recognize that the economy is embedded in the biosphere, Herman Daly, et cetera. There's another discipline or branch of neoclassical economics, which is called environmental economics. Gets confusing. Environmental economics is, to oversimplify, the discipline to figure out how to price these externalities we just talked about in order to bring the costs of these externalities back into the system, which arguably is a good thing to do, all else equal, right? You'd rather have the pollution priced into the system than not. And right now, the price of this pollution is zero, so that doesn't make any sense. And one of the leading academics of this discipline of environmental economics is a Yale professor named William Nordhaus. And Nordhaus won the Nobel Prize in economics in 2018 for his work on climate. And he developed a model called, can't make it up, the DICE model, as in roll the dice. I forget what it stands for. And this model allowed him to conclude that the target we should shoot for in terms of global heating is 3.5 degrees Celsius above the baseline rate. Right? And he won the award 3 years after the Paris climate talks, where the scientific consensus was we had to keep warming below 2 degrees, and we should do everything we can to keep it below 1.5 degrees. So 1.5 degrees is the scientific consensus from the UN process. And there's controversy around that, but we know that story. But hundreds, if not thousands, of climate scientists buy into this 1.5 degrees. And yet the economics profession decides that 3 degrees is the right target because, quote unquote, anything lower will cost too much. Cost too much in terms of foregone economic growth. Because there's a belief, and there's some truth to it, that if you restrain carbon emissions, you're going to restrain growth, because so much of our growth is fossil fuel driven, at least as of now. And there's so much growth in the underdeveloped economy that is, a moral imperative. And so just getting the global south, the global majority, to a standard of living that is subsistence level requires energy and therefore emissions. Again, depending on what kind of energy we use. But here's the thing. I'm sure William Nordhaus is not stupid. And yet his assumption was based on the ignorance of economics, which, going back to Newton, assumes that time is reversible. In Newton's equations, time goes forward and backward. And so what Nordhaus must have been thinking is that if we have economic growth at a higher level, we'll be richer, and so we'll have more money to fix the problems in the future.
And thus reduce the 3.5 degrees difference to reverse climate change.
Yeah, I can't get inside his head, but that's the only way I can rationalize, because he had to know the climate science.
Yeah.
And he had to conclude that these are problems we can fix. And here's where it gets crazy. If you read his actual paper, I kid you not, it says climate change won't affect manufacturing much because manufacturing happens indoors. Yes, it'll affect agriculture. I swear it says this. But agriculture is only 5% of the economy. It says that.
Yeah.
That's what the Nobel Prize committee must have read before they'd made the decision.
Yeah.
So the only way to get your head around how could someone who's clearly intelligent make such a, I would argue, ignorant, meaning not knowing reality, not stupid, just not knowing reality, conclusion, is that he's assuming that you can, he's missing the fact that time is path dependent. In other words, what happens today will change the possibilities of what's possible tomorrow. So if we go down this global heating path, we won't be able to get back to 1.5 degrees because we may have unlocked all feedback loops that no one even understands. Or we may have unlocked feedback loops that people do understand, and we interfere with the Gulf Stream, and Europe gets frigid. So it's not like money can fix those problems. And I would argue that, again, going back to Einstein theory determines what we're able to see, the neoclassical theory that Nordhaus is trained on presumes that time is reversible, meaning you can run the experiment forward and backward, meaning it doesn't matter what happens tomorrow because we can always fix it the day after tomorrow.
Yeah.
And that's just not true.
Yeah.
That's just factually wrong.
Thank you. Can I take a slight detour perhaps? And it's just something that I've had to think about a lot lately. We have a conference coming up, and there will be a debate between a professor from Berkeley, Tim Bowles, professor of agroecology, and a man named Michael Grunwald. And Michael writes a lot for the New York Times. He's got a book called Eating the Earth. And he is very similar in his beliefs to George Monbiot,
Okay.
Which is that we have to completely move our agriculture to very intensive, which means chemical production, because they believe that chemical production, intensive chemical production, is more productive per acre in yields than organic, based on limited research. And that because of that, less land will be taken up by farming. And as we have a population growth that we can't seem to stop or slow down even, well, we're slowing it down in this country, but not on the planet. And even in this country, we slow it down, but the population is still increasing. So that our only choice is to basically move to the green revolution throughout the world. You know, when I first heard this, it was from the chair of environmental studies at Dartmouth. And he was telling me, I was preparing for a conference at Dartmouth, and Paul Hawken was going to be our keynote, and I wanted to get a packed house for Paul. So I was going to all the professors and saying, please bring your students. And he looked at me and he said, you know, organic is worse for the climate than chemical agriculture. He said conventional. And I said, no, I didn't know that. And he said, well, there's this article in Nature, and it very clearly lays this out. So this is the same department that Dana Meadows was in 20 years earlier. This is taken very seriously in academia. It's taken very seriously by the US government. A lot of money is now shifting, where it's going and why it's going and how it's going. We can talk about that. But my question is, I thought it was insane. I thought okay, but we need to come up with a lucid response to this argument. Do you have any thoughts about how you would respond to that? How you feel about it? Is it the right question even?
So, this is a huge, complex question that I'm not an expert in. I can share what I learned through the grazing experience. What I know is true is that we conflate the problems of the industrial meat system, which requires growing grains, clearing the Amazon to grow more grains to feed more cattle. I've experienced ranches in the United States and have knowledge of them in New Zealand and Australia and South Africa. In fact, in Argentina, all around the world, where by shifting the management practice, you can easily double, if not triple, the stocking rates, meaning the animals per acre, on what are natural grasslands. The thought of cutting down a tropical rainforest to grow grass or to grow food for animals is industrial thinking that is very short-sighted. There is massive capacity to increase the animal stock on the existing grasslands of the world if they're managed in a holistic way. Now, does that mean those animals are going to taste the way we've gotten accustomed to a big, thick, juicy Texas steak tasting that has been fattened, where the animal's been fattened on grain to cause the animal to be unhealthy, to cause the animal to need antibiotics, to cause antibiotics in the water system, to create problems with our response to antibiotics? No, it might need to taste different than the steaks that we Americans have gotten used to. But I'm convinced that there's, if you just take the beef piece alone, there's massive capacity to increase beef production without, where animals are eating grass, not grain. So you're not growing any grains to feed animals. But when people do the math on the food system, they assume we have to expand the industrial meat system, which means turning, the tall grass prairies of Iowa and Indiana into cornfields to feed to cattle or to fuel our cars. So the inefficiency or the land limitation problem is because we're using our land for industrial agriculture, which doesn't make any sense. Not because what I would call organic, regenerative agriculture systems are incapable of achieving the productivity that industrial ag does. It's true that you can grow more corn per acre with chemicals than you can grow corn per acre without chemicals. But we shouldn't be growing all that corn to feed animals when the Great Plains have been turned into cornfields, and if they were turned back into grasslands, there'd be more room for animals to roam on the grasslands, which would be healthier for the animals and healthier for the planet. So it's an incredibly complex problem. This is actually something that I hope AI is going to help us, because that's what I just talked about is just meat and just in the United States. When it gets to Africa, you have different land conditions, different crop possibilities, and I don't know the answer to it. But I believe with every bone in my body that if you treat agriculture as an industrial system, you will create unintended consequences that will be bigger problems than the problem of, quote, poverty we're trying to solve in the first place. And I think that's been proven in India and in Africa.
I know we got to get to regenerative economics. I know. Let's go there, and then there's a place I want to go at the end. But so you have been developing your way of thinking about economics that you think is more useful, is more helpful to all of us if we can create a revolution in our thinking? And so this is really a big deal, which is that the stories we tell ourselves, whether we're even aware of it or not, are actually creating the world that we live in. And if we don't believe something if we believe something is impossible, we won't even try. And if we believe, of course, we should do that, we will try it and we will, by and large, succeed. So let's talk about what you believe is possible.
Well, the first thing I might say is that, people like you and the entire, call it the organic movement, the farmers market context, the farm to table, that's the regenerative economy. I'm just calling it something because it doesn't, if we call it farmers markets, it doesn't seem like it's the economy. It seems like a farmers market.
Yes.
But if you kind of analyze what's happening in the context of small farms, farmers markets, farm to table, what's probably the single most powerful word that will come to your mind?
The first word that comes to my mind is connection.
Okay.
Right? Because you're now dealing with an economy in which
Exactly.
people actually know each other and trust each other.
Exactly. So the first principle of my regenerative economics, I use the language in right relationship.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah.
So where did I come up with that? Well, I've studied living systems from the way the human body works to the way the grasslands work to the entire Gaia. And it seems very clear that one of the first principles, design principles, not like, this is not like a principle like be honest. I mean, like literally a descriptive design principle, is that life works in symbiotic win-win relationships, right? And it starts at the entire planet. The planet is in a right relationship with the sun and the moon, or we're not having this conversation. All the way down to the relationship between our cells in our bodies, in an organ, and the relationship between the organs in our bodies and the larger systems in our bodies. And so living systems have this quality that they move in, they find niches and they move in right relationship with each other. When in our economy, we're taught that it has to be competitive. Janine Benyus, the author of biomimicry and the kind of the driver behind the biomimicry movement, which is clearly a close cousin of what I'm talking about. She taught me, she said, John, species go through a learning curve, a growth curve, a maturation curve, where initially they compete, but then they find that it's easier to cooperate than compete. So what she calls a level 1 system would be like a bunch of weeds, and they compete for all the energy and they grow and then they die. But then the system matures into perennials, and the perennials have they have co-benefits of multiple species on the grasslands. The energy doesn't all go into the plant, into the flower. The energy goes into the root system, so they become perennials, regenerative, sustainable over a long period of time. And ultimately you get to a mature rainforest, which is filled with the complexity of interrelationships and co-benefits of all the different species working in harmony with each other. And so, and
at that point, it's a very stable system.
Yeah, incredibly resilient.
Yeah.
Right. So what the organic movement has done is it's shown us in that sector of the economy, the food sector, that a regenerative economy is, it's like we've done like 50 stories of projects that we see as the regenerative economy, and we describe the principles, and the entrepreneurs or the practitioners, they say, oh yeah, that's what I'm doing. And so I would argue the regenerative economy is everywhere. It's just hidden in plain sight and often corrupted by the overarching dominant extractive system. I'll give you a couple other examples, but the idea is to think of the economy as a healthy living organism, which means we need to understand the first principles of healthy living organisms and then apply them to the economy. When people ask me, well, show me the regenerative economy at scale, I often point to the Mondragon cooperatives in Spain. So it's a great story in the wake of the Spanish Civil War. I think it's roughly 70, 80 years ago now. A Catholic priest recognized that they had to figure out a way for people to have work, both for their livelihoods, but also for their dignity. And so they started. They just started building cooperative businesses where the workers owned the companies. And fast forward 70 years, 80 years, there's now, I think it's 80 businesses. The total sales of all of these 80 businesses that are based in the Basque Country in Spain is 20 billion euros. They're all cooperatively owned, meaning the workers own the businesses, which most people, when they study the Mondragon cooperatives, they come away thinking, oh, the answer is co-op ownership. I look at the Mondragon cooperatives and I say, oh, they're managing these 80 businesses as a single healthy ecosystem. And they literally, just like a tree does underground, when business A has a good year and business B is struggling, they transfer some of the profits from A to B. They manage it for the health of the whole as opposed to optimizing the health of the parts. That's holistic thinking as opposed to reductionist thinking. What we've done in the capitalist system is we try to optimize the stock price of each individual part at the expense of all kinds of unintended consequences. So if you can manage an ecosystem of 80 businesses for the health of the whole, there's no reason why that concept can't be expanded beyond the Mondragon cooperatives. And when I went to visit the Mondragon cooperatives, they themselves acknowledged that this doesn't need to be done as a co-op. The essence of it is that they are all working for the legacy of the Basque culture. So there's a higher end than short-term profits.
I was going to say, it's not a total shocker to me that this was started by a priest. I think that there's an element of faith in it.
Yeah.
And a moral vision. I know that what you're talking about isn't just about being a good person. It's about just being a sane creature that wants to survive and realizing that the whole system has to thrive for the parts to thrive.
Right.
But
that's the science.
That's
actually,
the science.
That's actual science.
That's the science. You know, I named the three elements of a sustainable system that Dana talks about, and she said those were all from Herman Daly. But the fourth one was that the system must be equitable for the people involved. And that was very significant because that's how I have felt about the Real Organic Project from the beginning. And not everybody agrees with that. I got a letter from somebody who supported us. He was one of the founders of an early organic distributor. And it was when I wrote a letter on Black Lives Matter. And I said in the letter, I'm writing this as a person, not as the director, but you are my audience, so I'm going to share with you because I have a lot of personal feelings here because I have a son who's a person of color and I fear for his life in this world of ours. And this is why I think it's important to say that Black Lives Matter. And I got a letter from this guy who said, stay in your lane. And we lost 2 farms and 50 readers all unsubscribed.
Wow.
So this was something that was not universally believed by the people who did believe in organic agriculture, but they didn't share at least my vision, and I think the vision of our organization, that organic needs to be bigger than that.
So let me try a different angle on the same question, because this living systems frame, regenerative economy, if someone wanted to put it in the liberal versus conservative bucket, it would certainly drop in the liberal bucket. But I go out of my way to try to avoid that axis. In fact, I like to say my dream is that in our country or in the world, the liberals and the conservatives are going to argue about how to create a regenerative economy in the future. That's a win for me.
Yeah.
And I actually see values from both sides of the political spectrum, but I try to limit. So I have a set of personal opinions about values, human values, but I try to limit my work to the science of living systems. And so this is where the 8 principles I talk about are important. One of them, this comes from a woman named Lisbeth Sahtouris. She was an ecologist or living system scientist. She uses the expression empowered participation. So as an example, my feet are empowered to participate in the circulation of oxygen in my body. That's true of, if you look at any living system, in a sense, the parts are empowered not just to get the food they need, but empowered to participate, which means to contribute back. It's a two-way exchange. And so if my feet are not empowered to participate in the circulation of oxygen, I can't walk. And if I can't walk, that limits some of the potential that I could manifest as a human being. So it's not a question of my ethics or my morals, give my poor feet some oxygen. It's actually undermining the potential of me as a whole if my feet can't contribute. And I would make the same argument about, what we call the diversity issue in this country and around the world. If we limit it, again, one can have very strong moral, convictions about it. I happen to share yours, but that's irrelevant to the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is that if we exclude, go to a global level, we're excluding the majority of people on this planet from participating in the health of society, as if their contribution means nothing to you and me. But it turns out that we're all connected to that. And whether it's because we're going to have mass migrations that are going to be a problem for us, or whether it's because someone in one of these, quote, poor countries is going to come up with some new creative idea that we're going to all benefit from. You and I don't know, but what I do know is the science is very clear, is that everything is connected. And so irregardless of my ethical beliefs, the health of human society is dependent on the empowered participation of all of its parts. That's what I believe. That's what the science says.
I actually think that you say that even better than Dana, so I appreciate it. I know I do. I appreciate that you've thought this out very clearly.
I think we fall into the trap of our moral stands on these issues, and then we're trapped in the left-right.
I agree, but I don't know how we create the change, which is, again, the system as it exists is Mount Everest sitting on my shoulders.
Yeah.
I become very short. And I don't know how we create that change without a call to people's hearts and their beliefs. I just don't think we're just going to logically figure it out.
No, I agree with that.
It's going to have to be a real appeal to somebody's emotions and what's important.
Yeah.
What I'm afraid is that it will be appeal to something much darker.
Yeah.
And I do expect that all the countries of the world might become very fascistic in order to deal with the crises, the multi-crises that will be unbearable.
Yeah. No, and I'm not naive to, there's the base case path we're on. and there's the Hail Mary pass. And I'm working on the Hail Mary pass, just to be clear.
Yeah.
But I'll share just one interesting dimension on this. So I was just at a meeting in Sweden, and it was the theme was eco-civilization, which is that a concept that you're familiar with?
I don't know eco-civilization.
So eco-civilization is you can sort of infer from the word what we're talking about, a human civilization that is compatible with ecology, that is aligned with ecology. It has all of the vibrations of what I'm talking about. But guess who's enshrined it in their constitution as a goal? China.
China. I was going to get wild and say China.
It's China.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that this, forget about regenerative, the word, holistic thinking, sort of balanced left brain, right brain, as opposed to left brain driven. And E. McGilchrist, his book, Mastering the Emissary, is brilliant on this. It's much more Eastern than Western. And now I'm getting into another subject that I'm not really qualified to, but the Eastern traditions, particularly I've learned Neo-Confucianism in particular, but all of the Eastern traditions are much closer to this holistic understanding. Their languages are not linear, right? They're symbolic. And so it turns out, and this became very apparent at this meeting in Sweden, that this need to toggle back to this balanced way of thinking, holistic thinking, not at the expense of the reductionist method. Use it when you're designing your greenhouse or when you're designing a rocket ship. But this balanced, broader intelligence that we're all born with is much more innate. It's much closer to the surface in Eastern cultures. Even though the Chinese country is largely run by engineers right now. But remember, in their mind, they think in 100-year, 1,000-year time spans. So yes, modernizing China is an engineering project. But their culture hasn't lost touch with this more balanced, holistic view. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we see what I would call the regenerative economy emerge out of Asia. Because once, to your point, there needs to be this sort of heart-based response. Well, there's a Singaporean businessman, fourth generation, large family business, who is standing on stages, giving speeches that say, we have to begin with love. And so he's inspiring the business community to, be heart-centered, love-led, as opposed to extractive, profit-led. But for him, this holistic thinking is natural. And so, I don't know how this is going to play out. I agree with you 100%. It's not going to play out because someone reads John's textbook and logically says, oh, this makes sense. For me, I experienced 9/11. People who quote, get this, either were never identified with the extreme rational minds of finance and tech. More likely, they're women than men. If you look at my class on regenerative economics, it's probably 75% women. So feminine intuition is just inherently more of a right brain quality. And so, I think there's a couple problems. One is we've got way too much power sitting in the hands of, I'll call them extreme logic mind, analytical mind thinking people. The Elon Musks of the world, the tech community. I used to be worried about the finance community, but it's actually the tech community is scarier now. And we then associate that with success because our culture has defined success as money. But there's lots and lots of other people and other cultures where we're not so out of balance. So my hope is that as things continue to get worse, and they will, more and more people will wake up, that more and more people will have experiences that says something's fundamentally wrong here. And the thing I've experienced about this living systems paradigm is when people see it, they're like, this just makes total sense. There's nothing radical about thinking that we ought to align our economy with the way life works. It seems like a self-evident truth to me. And I've experienced more people approaching me now, questioning this. The worse things get, the more interested people get in what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, you've said that innovation is less likely to come from the people who are enormously successful because that whole system is working pretty well for them.
Yeah.
A lot of people are not enormously successful around the world right now. And that's going to create an instability and a drive to change, which might get very messy, but it will be what it will be. One of the things that is confusing to me in the work that I do, which is not really very different from the work that you do, honestly.
Yeah.
And I find that we're spending a lot of our energy on education, on conversation, on podcasts like this. We're trying to put out dialogues with people who are thinking important thoughts and sharing that with people. And it changes how people think, just as you got changed by reading Limits to Growth. And its logic did strike you, and it did change your life.
Yeah.
So I think that is possible, but I'm just curious, that's what you're doing too. You're doing a lot of education. You wrote an excellent book. You have a course that actually I look forward to.
Oh, yeah, I'd love to have you.
And is that where you are going to double down? Do you go, if we can hit some unknown tipping point in our group mind, that then suddenly everything changes?
It is, again, it doesn't mean it's the right answer, but for me, it's become very clear, and education isn't even the right word. What I'm experiencing, and there's now, I think, 2,500 people that have been through my 8-week course, and we don't go out and target them. There's like an attraction. They find it through word of mouth or serendipity. And it's more of an awakening experience. It's like I'm sharing with them a way to make sense of the chaos that they already know. They already have it. It's just like the dots connect. It's like a crystallization. I don't convince people to give up the way they think and oh, you're right, John, that's a smart idea. Now I'm going to think the way you do. That doesn't happen. What happens is they get attracted. There's a force happening. There's change happening that is beyond our ability to explain it. Why would 2,500 people show up to an online course when they're busy that did no advertising other than LinkedIn posts?
Yeah.
Because there's a hunger for this. And then people come out of it and say, and they quit their day job and they launch a new initiative. And there's a theory of change that's underlying this, which is I think robust, which is partly Dana's understanding. She was once asked, how do you change a complex system? And I'm sure you're familiar with her leverage points, places to intervene in a system. And she goes through 10 things, and they're stuff that some would be intuitive, some not. But the punchline is the most important leverage point is the paradigm within which the system exists. Another way of saying it's the theory that determines what you're able to see. And so we live in a paradigm of capitalism, of extractive capitalism, a paradigm of separation, right? I'm separate from you, I'm separate from this thing we call nature. That's all seemingly the water we're swimming in. And so the most important paradigm, if I want to change policy, I can't argue about my principles with, and I tried with an Obama administration Treasury official. He threw me out of the room, basically, because he lives in the paradigm of the machine. So it's not about politics. It's about seeing the economy as a living system as opposed to a machine to be optimized. And so we need to shift that paradigm, and that's more of an awakening experience than an educational experience. And then, you know, the second layer of our theory of change comes from another scientist, a guy called Ile Prigogine. You've probably heard this expression. He's one of the founders of chaos theory. And he said, when a system is in a state of chaos, when a system is in what's called far from equilibrium, very unstable, which is very different than when the system is very stable and smooth. But when things are getting shaky, he says, small islands of coherence can shift the entire system. So you've built an island of coherence around the Real Organic project. We're building an island of coherence around this educational platform, building a community. There's thousands of other islands of coherence.
Yeah.
They're all invisible. You don't see them on the evening news. But you know, it's, you know, that there's a you know, you can super cool water below freezing in a container, and it doesn't freeze until you tap the glass. I forget what that's called.
I don't know.
It's true.
Yeah.
So the tap is the shift.
Yeah.
And so we're super cooling, you know, the potential for shift. And I don't know what the tap of the glass is going to be, but something tapped the glass and the Berlin Wall fell down.
Yeah.
That's the project we're involved in, and it's more like a metamorphosis than a change. I think metamorphosis is the right analogy, and so we're, you know, these imaginal shells are doing their work now, and we don't know what the butterfly is going to look like, but I have a belief that, you know, one way or the other, no matter what happens, no matter how difficult it gets, we're going to come out of this recognizing that our economy needs to participate in and be a part of the living system that we're all embedded in. I don't know how you can not conclude that.
Yeah.
So I'm not pretending that it's not going to get worse. I'm just arguing that we need to learn how to do this, and the sooner we learn, the sooner we'll come out the other end.
Yeah.
Of the chaos.
That's great. We call them islands of sanity. So instead of islands of coherence, but very similar.
Yeah.
And because we see that we can create those islands of coherence, but I don't know how to change the whole. No. But we have to work at where we can. I want to ask you a question. This might be a difficult question. I interviewed Paul Hawken yesterday, and we started talking about the word regenerative. And Paul's term was that it's become a weasel word. And of course, this is from someone who wrote the book called Regeneration. And what he meant by that is not a weasel idea, but the word has been, as so many words are,
co-opted.
Co-opted by, corporate interests, and they love the term regenerative.
I know.
All of big food has moved and embraced the term regenerative, and they actually use it as a weapon against organic. And God knows we have been fighting to prevent the co-option of the word organic. Yeah. But Syngenta hates organic because there's no way they can steal the word. They are the opposite. Mm-hmm. So I'm just curious, because I think that Paul would shudder if I said we have to fight for our words, because he doesn't like the model of fighting. He wants to think that we're going to win this differently. But what do you think? Because I know what you mean by regenerative, or I have a pretty good idea.
Yeah.
And I know it is not what Bayer means by regenerative or Pepsi means by regenerative. But they have such a huge microphone.
Yeah.
And we're here with our very small microphones.
Yeah, no, it's a big problem. You know, I guess I would say a couple things on that. So this learning platform, start with one fact. This learning platform we created is a partnership between myself and a company called In Rhythm. And we decided not to call it the Capital Institute platform because we didn't want it identified with me or one, organization. And we decided not to call it the Regenerative Learning Community because we knew the word was going to be polluted and co-opted. So we called it the With Life community. So, economics with life, finance with life, leadership with life, entrepreneurship with life. It's hard to co-opt life, but it's the fact is that regeneration is a scientific term that has scientific meaning.
Yes.
So I can't control how people use a word. So I tend to talk more about aligning with how life works or aligning with living systems. It's also why I tend to try to stay to the science as opposed to the political ethics or moral positions. Because I've had ecologists, Janine Benyus, Sally Gorner, people who are scientists have reviewed the 8 principles I talk about. They're not John's principles. They're one person's best description of a complex process that is beyond reducing to 8 things. But so far, it's effectively been, informally peer-reviewed as, credible science, rigorous science. And that's the best I can do to preserve the integrity of the meaning. And beyond that, the big companies are going to do what they're going to do, and we'll probably have to stop using the word.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, you've been in that war longer than I have.
I know. We decided not to go on to a new term. We certainly considered it.
Yeah.
But
you said real organic.
We did. Oh, we
So
did.
maybe we need the real regenerative movement.
That's right. Well, I've been calling for that for some years now.
Yeah.
And the problem with moving on to a new term is if you succeed, they will take that too.
Exactly.
That, these companies want to go where people's hearts are, where their interest is.
Yeah.
And it's not mean or evil.
Right.
It's just, that's what they do. They go to where the money is. They go to where people want to be, and they go, good, we want to be there too.
Right.
And I felt like, no, we've got to put a stake in the ground and say, this means something. You can't have it just because you want it.
Right. Although regenerative economy, so there's regenerative businesses, there's regenerative products. That's where that battleground plays out.
Yes.
No one can have their own economy. There is an economy. There is a discipline of economics, and my end game is actually to shift the discipline of economics, so that what becomes the water we swim in, second nature that we don't think about, is how do we build a company that's organized and organizes in alignment with how life works.
Yeah.
And whatever product they make and what they call it, I'm less, this is going to sound maybe strange, but I think there's much more opportunity for, let's call it well-being, which is another term that has become popular. If companies, whatever they make, however they make it, if they were to manage themselves for the health of the whole organism, they would be more productive. I mean, no one wants to work for these big companies anymore. Mm-hmm. And just in old-fashioned productivity terms, the lost productivity of having employees that don't believe in the business, are disengaged at work, don't like their job, they've been forced into a cog in a machine. If businesses were smart and they created healthy organisms, more people are going to want to work there, and more good potential will come out of that, including innovations that are aligned with how life works, than if we hammer Nestle to fix one product in their product line. Like, I just don't find that, for me, it's not the work I'm interested in.
I hear you, and I agree. It's an inner, there's a reality that I'll pick King Grove down in Florida.
Love the blueberries.
Fantastic. And the fantastic farm,
Yeah.
fantastic people. And you go there and you go, oh, this is right.
Yeah.
This is what I want to support.
Yeah.
And this is, you eat it, you go, this is the food I want to eat.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, they have been quite successfully pushed on the shelves of Whole Foods because they're competing at that point with blueberries come from Mexico and Peru.
Yeah.
And instead of paying people $18 an hour to pick them, people are being paid $1 an hour to pick them.
Right.
And it's pretty hard to compete with that. Never mind the fact that often they're not following the organic standards.
Right.
I mean, sometimes they're following the standards that are wrong around hydroponic. But sometimes we've tested, it's just sprayed with prohibited chemicals. So there's all that stuff where it's not part of the community, so you can't see whether they're lying or not. And nonetheless, they can put you out of business.
Yeah.
And that's just a reality that all the 1,000 farms we represent deal with.
Yeah.
Which is, we still have to survive in that marketplace.
I mean, I came to visit you with my microgreen company. We got put out of business by hydroponics.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah.
I mean, there were other reasons, but that was the real killer. So I get it. I mean, I've lost a lot of money learning that reality.
Yeah.
And there is no, there's no answer. There's no, the transformation from, to use my metaphor, caterpillar to butterfly is not smooth, easy, and fun. It's messy and hard, and there's no two ways about it. This challenge of living in the system that exists, and this, I've got 3 kids. It's hardest for the next generation. They know what they want to do. They get all this, but the job market says if you want to make money, if you want to make a living, if you want a job, the jobs are over here. I don't have enough jobs in the regenerative economy to point them toward.
Right. It's still in its infancy.
Yeah.
And we see there is cause for hope, but it's still in its infancy.
Yeah.
And we see these many little models that are, I think they're mostly thriving on the blood, sweat, and tears of the people involved. They carry a load on
I'm
their
looking
back.
at one.
Right. They're swapping their bodies for capital often.
Yeah.
And but they are. And I just interviewed a great farm in New York a couple of weeks ago, and that's exactly what they're doing, and it's working.
Yeah.
And I noticed in your example, except for Mondragon, they were all very small, and they were all very community-based.
Yeah.
And Mondragon was an example, and a really precious example of something where I assume they're marketing probably internationally their products.
Yeah.
Do you think that a local-based economy is going to be where this happens?
So yes and no. So one of the principles that I talk about is honors community in place. So compared to the current global economy where we've optimized efficiency on global supply chains, yes, it will be much more decentralized. It will need to be much more decentralized. And that's already happening, interestingly. In fact, that's almost, here's the crazy thing. That's happening in response to Donald Trump more than anything else, as well as energy supply chains, wars in the Middle East. So the move toward more resilient, more localized economies, you could argue is happening for the wrong reason, but the theory that determines what everybody will see, that the efficiency-driven globalization was built on a lie. It became very fragile, and it's now fractured, not because people got together and thought about it and read books and decided we should do this, because there was a disturbance in the system called Donald Trump. And so maybe that's the universe's way of, Kamala Harris wasn't going to do it, frankly. That would have been more of business as usual. So maybe the universe knows more than we do. And Trump is serving a purpose to wake us up to the fragility of this, quote, global efficient economy. And now all of a sudden you have economists talking about resiliency. Well, it turns out that a balance between efficiency and resiliency is a first principle of living systems. And they actually balance more toward resiliency than efficiency. And the more the chaos in the environment, the more they'll shift toward resiliency. So the regenerative economy is actually growing in response to the Trump chaos.
Growing chaos.
Right?
Okay.
I like to talk about the internet as an example of regenerative economy infrastructure, because one of the principles I talk about is robust circulation. That's self-evident. A living organism has to have robust circulation, including healthy inputs, the food we eat, healthy outputs where our waste gets deposited, but also robust circulation inside, the metabolism of the organism. This is not just about matter and energy, which is what the circular economy is about. We live in an information age, so it's also about information. So what does the internet do? It makes the circulation of information exponentially more feasible, which enables the empowered participation of billions of people into the project we call the global economy. The project called global culture that wasn't possible before. But what have we done? We've allowed businesses like Facebook to have business models that are extractive, that use the internet. They've essentially, think of the internet as a commons. And we've allowed the Facebooks of the world to enclose the commons for their benefit. When in fact, the internet should be a co-inherited wealth of all human beings. Because no one invented the internet. It emerged out of all kinds of scientific advances. But we need to learn to manage it as a commons if we're to all benefit from its potential as a commons. And I don't know how to do that. That's a big project right there.
Yeah.
But the point is that there are all these things emerging without some master plan that are aligned with the direction of a regenerative economy. From farmers markets to the internet to Mondragon to Donald Trump.
Yes.
So maybe it's going to happen in a way just like the Berlin Wall fell, slowly and then quickly, and no one saw it coming. That's my belief.
I hope that you're right. I had an interesting conversation with Seth Godin about the internet.
Yeah.
And he said, when it started, I really had such great hopes for it as a force of democracy in our culture.
Yeah.
And instead it's turned into a cesspool.
Yeah.
And what you say is true, which is that it is an amazing place for the free exchange of ideas and information.
Yeah.
And it's also a place for the free exchange of really scary thoughts that obviously, possibly destroy our children.
Right.
And so it's both, and we will see how we learn to handle it.
Yeah.
We're in new territory.
Well, and with AI coming, it's...
I know.
we won't go there today.
Okay. All right, John Fullerton. There's so much we didn't get to, but there's so much we did. We'll make probably 2 sessions out of this. Your book is called Regenerative Economics. You just hold it up just so that people get a sense. Beautiful. And I'm in the middle of it. I highly recommend it. And you've got a course also, which people can find, I'm sure, by just Googling you. And
Capital Institute.
Capital Institute
is my organization.
Is the place to go.
Yeah.
And thank you for spending this afternoon.
Oh, Dave, thanks for coming down. It's great to see you again.
It's great.
Thanks for spending your time with us today. The Real Organic Podcast is part of the work of the Real Organic Project, a farmer-led movement to protect organic integrity and support the farms with real soil stewardship and accountability. You can look for our label in stores, farm stands, and farmers markets across the country. Our weekly audio and video episodes are produced and edited by Jenny Prince and engineered by Brandon StCyr. We also want to recognize our small but mighty team who travels the country inspecting farms and helps to propel our movement forward. We want to say a special thank you to the farmers who get certified with us. Your commitment is the foundation of this work, and we are honored to stand alongside you. And lastly, this show is made possible by donations from listeners like you. Your support helps keep this work free and independent, and we thank you for choosing to support us. If you'd like to make a contribution, please visit realorganicproject.org/donate. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time.